I'm Dean, and this is Sheri, my beautiful wife of last 42 years.
Oh my goodness.
And so we come from different backgrounds completely. I grew up here on this land, this farm, and
Which is beautiful.
My dad was actually born on a farm about 2 miles from here. So and he passed away on this farm. He was the son of a sharecropper, and who worked like a Trojan to pay off the first little bit of ground that they could call their own. Because being a sharecropper's like pretty bad. It's at the bottom of the barrel, And but anyway, God was good. God was a fortune, and they were able to pay it off. And then we grew up out here, raising. Back when I was little, we had cotton, and which. Cotton, I'm so glad we didn't grow any of it too much when I was little, because it is back-breaking, and it is. So he switched over to raising just some cattle, and we had some sheep, and we had those for when I was growing up.
When was that he switched over? Or when was he growing up here, and then?
Well, when he grew up, it was cotton farming. This is all cotton farming around here.
Is that like the 20s or the 30s?
He was born in 1912.
Okay.
So he would have been 100 and...
Well, he was
well over 100.
Okay.
And I'm the youngest child he had, and he was in his 40s when I was born.
Okay, wow.
So I was the surprise.
But he did crops also, maybe not cotton, but didn't he do corn and wheat?
We did a little bit of corn, we grew some milo and to sell, and we just raised cows, and I remember when I was little, we had a bunch we were milking. I think up to about 8 or 10, and
that's
my mom and dad, they could milk real good. They could milk in no time, and I could not. But so I grew. When I was real little, I got to experience having to milk and having to pick cotton and things like that, and which is backbreaking, long hours and stuff. But transitioned later into just having some cows out here, and it all kind of changed back in the 50s because he couldn't make it anymore just on farming, and there was a severe drought those years, and so he got a job, I think, with the Brazos Electric Co-op, and working with them, and so he would be gone a lot of the time because he would leave on Mondays and come back on Fridays.
Oh, wow.
For years and years and years. And so my mother and my brothers and I, we would have to do all the farm work and stuff like that. And so I remember from a little guy on driving a tractor since I was old enough to reach the pedals.
Like 12, 10?
Oh, we're talking 8.
No way.
And probably. And I think, I remember so clearly my dad getting real mad at me one time. He said, "Drive this tractor home." And I said, "Okay." And I jumped on and drove. And he forgot to tell me that the brakes were out on that tractor right then. So I come buzzing around the house, just not slowing down. I just wanting to go fast. And then I hit the brakes, and there were no brakes. So I wound up hitting a fence, a gate post, and knocked it over and stuff like it. And he was mad as all get out that I had messed up that gate.
He forgot to tell you important piece of information.
Yeah.
Move it just a little bit closer, Dean. You mind? Just
So
a little-
I said, well, you should have told me the brakes were out. And I didn't know. So anyway, it was, we grew up working cattle, feeding hay, and I did. Where all my life, I remember I started hauling hay with my brothers when I was 8 to 10 years old, and helping. And they paid me a half a cent per bale.
There were square bills.
The little square bales.
Uh-huh.
So if we hauled 100 bales, I got, what is that?
50 cents.
Yeah.
50 cents.
Which I thought I was rich.
Okay.
But so I grew up in this life. I grew up and I was used to it, and I like it. I really love it. And then Sheri came from a completely different background. She grew up. Her folks were in the military, and so she actually graduated high school from in Tokyo, Japan.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, and then I met Dean. I lived in Austin.
Okay.
And I met Dean, and I always really had been a country girl, really in heart. I've always loved being outside and camping, all that kind of stuff. But I never really. My grandparents had a farm, but it was just in Pennsylvania, just a couple little cows, and not a whole lot. I always really liked it though, and so then when I met Dean, and we ended up getting married, and I just was like, after 2 years, I was like, it's time to move, because that's what I'd done my whole life. You go somewhere and you're there 2 years, and then you move.
My kids feel the same thing. They grew up moving this is the longest we've ever been somewhere.
Yes. So, and you don't really have roots when you move all the time, But there's value to it, because I learned that there's a lot of different people in the world, and yet we're all the same in a lot of ways, And so I think in the military you learn just to accept the differences in people. So that was the value of that. And I liked moving around too. But, I'd never had roots. And when I married Dean, we'd be in the grocery store, and he'd say hi to some little old lady, and he'd tell me, that was my second grade teacher. And I was like amazed. I was like, your second grade teacher? You still see her, But Dean was really good about teaching me right from the start. In fact, I'll tell you this story.
Yeah.
The very first day we got back from our honeymoon, I'm going to tell you. The very first day, we had gone to Colorado for our honeymoon, and so, we traveled, and I was tired, and I woke up, and there was Dean at the bottom of the bed with his flannel shirt on, ready to go. And he says, we wake up early around here. And I was like, oh no, I knew I wasn't going to be a good farmer's wife, But I was kind of worried about whether I'd do well out here, just because in my mind, I thought that a farmer's wife, you need to know how to can, you need to quilt. And, I was thinking like Little House on the Prairie. Come to find out, most farmers' wives work in town to supplement the income, because with a small farm, you need to do that, You can't hardly make it with a small farm. But I did not work. I had a little girl, Summer, and I just so much wanted to just be home with her, and Dean was good with that. And so I was so thankful for that. And he just started teaching me right away how to do everything. And I just loved it. I think first taught me to plow, I think was the first thing.
And I'll tell this story
Hey,
on
come on.
her. This plow we had, it was a good plow, but if you plowed with it wrong, it left a little trench in the field. And we had learned that you overlap just a little bit and you don't have that trimp. So it's a lot smoother on that. So we plowed it, and this old ground is kind of hard. So then a lot of times we'll plow it again, but we'll plow crossways of the way we plowed the first time. And I told Sheri all this, but I guess she didn't listen at that part, and she didn't believe it. So I thought, this is a good time for a lesson. I said, honey, that was really, really good. Can you cross plow it for me now? And she says, sure. So she went ahead and cross plowed it. So this time, instead of just tractor being smooth, it goes boof, boof.
In those ditches.
All those little ditches. And she found out the reason we overlapped just a little.
Yeah.
There were some other things that wasn't as good. I told her to stay away from the fence. Don't plow too close to the fence. But she didn't listen on that one either.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to fix fence in several places where she took out some of the fence.
Yeah, I was too busy trying to do things like fast, and I wanted to get real close to the fence so that you didn't like waste any land, and that's not worth it.
Really?
But I'm a detailed oriented, I really so one thing I really was good at was cultivating the corn. So you have this equipment where it just has these spikes, and they're spaced where they would dig down into the soil beside the corn rows. So the thing is, if you get off, you're
messing
gonna
your
dig
corn.
up the corn.
Is that to weed?
Yeah.
It is. Okay.
Yeah, to get the weeds. And anyway, so I like doing that, and I took to it pretty good but Dean told me, he's like, okay, you look at this certain like spot on the wheel, there's a way to gauge where you're at. He said, don't look back, because when you look back, you're gonna just even a little bit turn that tractor the
Wheel.
steering wheel thing, and then you dig up your corn,
Yeah.
and so I found out that was true. You just have to trust it. You just and I didn't look back, and it really worked. But it makes you nervous, you
Yeah.
know. You really feel like, I don't know, I might be digging up the whole thing back there, but you don't look back, and that was kind of a life lesson that that God kind of spoke to me too. Is don't look back. Don't look back at your past. Move forward. Set your goal. Have your goal and just go for it. And it'll work.
There's so many life. I mean, we were talking about this with some friends at our life group just the other night, just about sheep, since I always had sheep.
Uh-huh.
And I have come to the opinion that every pastor in every church in the world should spend at least 6 months to a year tending sheep and doing nothing but reading passages about sheep and shepherds throughout the Bible. And I said that it would solve so many of the world's problems if they did that. It was just the pastors. And because sheep, we've had cows, and cows are dumb. Really, they are dumb. They're stupid. I mean, they'll stick their head to break into a field that's nothing growing out of their side because it's there. But cows are rocket scientists compared to sheep.
Really?
Sheep are so stupid. It is just, and we were talking about how they do this dumbest stuff. It's just.
Josh was telling me how he lost a sheep the other day or a few months ago.
From overeating.
Yeah, just ate herself to death or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we've had that happen too. We
Yeah.
had a place in the barn that we had some seed, and it was some wheat seed, and we just had to store it in there. And there was a little extra seed, so I would feed just a little bit of it at a time to the sheep. Well, we had a big storm, and the storm opened up the thing. They blew the door open, and I didn't know it. And so I went down there, and the sheep had gotten into the grain, and we lost about
A lot. 12.
12, 15
goodness.
sheep
Okay.
that basically ate themselves to death.
It was terrible. We went down there, and there they all were laying, and big old stomachs just puffed up, and some of them had died, some of them were going to die, and we saved a few of them. But a lot of them had lambs. It was terrible. But yeah, sheep can teach you a lot of lessons. One thing that God showed me one time is I was letting them out of the pen, and sheep are real skittish. I was letting them out of the pen, and one sheep decided, one of the first ones decided there was some wire or something across the doorway, and he jumped over that wire that wasn't there, and every single sheep that came after him jumped over it.
Did the same thing.
Yeah.
Even though there's no wire there.
No wire. There was nothing there. It's just, and God, he showed me, we are like sheep. We are followers, It doesn't matter if the wires are there or not. If someone else does it, we easily follow, And I mean, God talks about us being sheep, and so it's really interesting, really, to see how sheep do live and how they act,
Yeah.
And even and this happened one time. It was so clear because we used to pen our sheep at night because the coyotes they love sheep too. They love to eat. So we'd pen them, and then I would let them out on the pasture in the mornings. And so we were doing that. And one time I'd let them out, and I was walking back to my house, and I heard the Spirit of the Lord speak us, turn around. So I turned around, and then I saw there was a coyote that had been laying in wait. So the whole flock was out on this pasture, and this coyote was chasing them back and forth. And I, was in it. So I'm running like crazy as fast as I could go, which wasn't very fast, but I was getting there, but some thoughts in that, and it's like the Lord was speaking to me and showing me, well, he's not rushing in and just grabbing one, the coyote. He's chasing them until one sheep gets tired, and he's off to the by himself there. And the coyote simply got in between that sheep and the rest of the flock. And the coyote was tired. He was winded. I could see that. And he started walking up to the sheep, and the sheep was just sitting there and not running. And he was going to go and kill the sheep right there. And I managed to get there in time to save my sheep. But the lesson the Lord really spoke to me is that that's just like it is with people in the church. We're in a big flock, and we have problems in the flock. And for one reason or another, the enemy chases us around until we separate from the flock. And then we're fair game for the enemy come to leisurely destroy us.
Wow.
And So, and it was really teaching me a lesson about like church. And it's so easy to get disgruntled or dissatisfied with what's going on in church because we've been hurt or something inside the church, and then so we separate ourselves from, and without realizing when we do that, that's what the enemy wanted us to do, separate from the flock. And so that we could be fair game.
Yeah.
And it was a life lesson that the Lord really kind of spoke to me as things were happening and teaching me, says, you and have to be with the flock. So ever since that time, I've taken it to heart, and I have made sure, even when I'm not real happy with what's going on, that I don't separate myself from the flock, you know. And
Yeah, and a lot of times it would be lambs too, because they don't know, they're not smart. And sheep will, the bigger mature sheep will surround a lamb and lambs and to protect them, but if a lamb just gets out there, I mean, there's always we lost a lot of them one year. There was always coyotes, in the woods. I mean, it's just such a picture of Satan,
Yeah.
back in the woods, back in the dark, just waiting and waiting till that young one. So it really spoke to me that, we need to really watch over our young believers, because they don't realize how dangerous things are,
Yeah.
So we need to surround them and protect them and just help them,
And even our solution when we were losing so many lambs, and I was thinking, well, we just got to get rid of all of them because we're not getting any lambs. The coyotes are eating all the lambs. And the Lord told me, he said, well, get a guard animal. So we got a genie donkey, which I didn't know at the time, but they're very protective. And we got her and put her with the sheep, and we stopped losing lambs. We lost one lamb after we got her, and we didn't lose any more because the genie was shepherd to the flock and stay with them and keep the coyotes away. And they and I didn't know this until we got the coyote. The coyote was no match for the genie. A genie can just kill a lion.
Well,
But I've seen videos of it, but it's just they bite like a dang crocodile, and they can kick.
Yeah, they got some power.
The expression "kick like a mule." They kick, and it's just I didn't realize it, but then I surprised her one day, and she kicked out a section of the side of the barn. I was, what the heck? She just boom! It was so quick.
Wow.
And it's so powerful,
and yet they have this gentle protective heart, for sheep, and I guess probably other things too. But I remember one time there was a sheep that was gonna have a lamb, and we knew she was going into labor, so I like to go and watch them, And I drove down there in the truck and just parked the truck and just watched. And that Jenny came over too and just stood right by the sheep. She had twins and stood there right by the sheep the whole time. And then after she had her babies and they got up and everything, then the Jenny went off. It was so sweet. She just came and guarded her while she was...
How was she with people?
she was real gentle.
Real gentle.
You don't have to worry about them with like the kiddos.
No. They used to. Our kids were little at the time, and they used to just want to ride her, so they crawl up on her back but and this Jenny's name was Candy, and Candy would just, okay, you can crawl up there, but I'm not going to move.
I'm not moving.
I'm not going
So
in
they
there.
get tired, get off. But
I think with every animal, it's, the females are better.
Really?
I think a jack might not be as good.
now Jack would be, they're you got to be careful with the Jack donkey, but which is the male, but the females, the Jennies, are really are sweet. And I didn't know this until I started reading up about them and stuff. But all donkeys have a cross on their back, and the legend is when Christ rode a donkey into Jerusalem, and since that time they have all carried a cross on their back. So you can find any Jenny or any donkey, and you look on their back, and their backbone makes the up and down, but they always have two branches, and you can look from the top and you'll see a cross.
Like the large ribs or something, or
No, it's like their hair is different on
No
all
way.
of them.
It's a marking on their back.
It's a marking, but you can see it on
Straight
any one of them.
that's
You can
cool.
see the markings of the cross.
Huh.
And I didn't believe it, and I started looking, and sure enough, even ours was a paint donkey. So it was white and brown and stuff. And I started looking, and doggone, you could see the cross. And I've looked on other Jennies and stuff, and sure enough, you can see the cross from a miniature to a full size. It's just,
wow.
and it's like God leaves so many witnesses of His glory and so many things. And that's one reason we really like it out here, because, this morning I got up and beautiful sunrises.
Huh.
Well, yesterday there was a glorious sunrise, and it was just the mist coming out of the valley, and it puts a golden hue on the morning when the sun comes up, with all the pinks and the reds and the oranges coming out and stuff. It's just
Where is it over
like that.
that way?
And it's just a glorious thing to see early in the morning, and it's just I always feel like Sheri's always said that after she passes, she's asked the Lord to let her paint the sunrise or paint the sunsets, and so it's just like every day it's a new picture. Every day it's a new picture. You get just like a gigantic art gallery. You get to go, wow, what are you doing this morning? And it changes. It opens up right before your eyes. And so seeing the glory of His creation, you can see it in the middle of the city, but I get to see so much out here and realize it without ever thinking about it. It's just, you see stuff and you go, oh, that's so cool. I thank you, Lord.
Yeah.
And all the time.
It seems like we do miss out on a lot when we're disconnected and distant from being with the the ground
The earth
that we were
yeah.
made from. Take a big chunk of ground and breathe life into it, and
Yeah.
all these agrarian. Like, I wouldn't have thought about the sheep. I remember Kevin Johnson saying that he got the 10 sheep in Ireland or something, or
Yes.
Scotland,
Yeah.
and that was life changing for him. But I'm kind of like,
Mhm.
I don't get it. But
Well, I think another thing with sheep, just the idea of just that you're a shepherd, you're watching over them, you're tending to them, you're feeding them, you're moving them to a different pasture that has better grass. You're looking for water, making sure they have water, and
Still water.
It just
still water.
speaks of
Water.
Really?
Because if their wool gets wet and they get in the water, they sink.
It's too heavy.
mhm.
And so they look for still water to drink.
Mhm.
It's a safety thing. And
There's so much here.
24th song, you know, is
Yeah.
20,
is a 23rd. Yeah.
it might
Yeah.
be something 24.
Yeah, it's
Maybe it continued on. But
Wow.
yeah, it's all true.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow.
So.
It's sad to me that you say like you can't make it as a small farm. And that feels like it's not right. Is that a system? Is that a symptom of the times back then? Because we had big ag was everything, and you couldn't compete, or is like why is that? And it's like you have like 20 different businesses. The sheep is a different business than the.
You have to look for things on the farm to bring some income. And when she says you can't make it on just a farm income, it's because you're not looking for a lot of money enough to sustain a normal lifestyle. You know,
You're not.
Well, it'd be nice.
It'd be
but
nice, but
nowadays, it's extremely hard.
so it's like if you have something that requires a tractor. You know, a tractor does so much work.
So that's one of the reasons why. So because you have this huge equipment that's so expensive.
Yeah.
Well, like that tractor, it can do the work of 10 people. You know, and it's just essential. We have gone to have round bales, which each bale weighs between 15 to 1,800 pounds.
Goodness.
But it saves so much labor because, like when I fed cattle this winter, I would go ahead and I put out 5 bales of hay, and then I put them in feeders and stuff, and then I don't have to feed for 5 or 6 days.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so
and it takes you about an hour and a half to put it all out.
yeah, and all that, and so the tractor is what I have to use. So our tractor broke down. It blew a thing out on a hydraulic line.
Okay.
Well, I couldn't get anybody to work on it because that was beyond me, and it took about a month or so before I could get somebody to fix it, and without the tractor, I couldn't feed.
Yeah.
So I had to.
Because you need it to haul it over there.
I borrowed a tractor from a relative and stuff, and so the tractor is essential. But that tractor, is valued at $25,000.
Yeah, we paid that, I think, and it was well used.
Well, and that tractor is 45 years old.
Get out of town.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's an old tractor.
It's $45,000 still.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it's still used. I mean, for what I use, it's plenty good. So that's the reason it's hard for small farms to make it. There's so many tasks that they need a tractor for.
And that's just a tractor. I mean, if you're going to plant a crop, you got to have a plow. They don't really cultivate corn anymore. They use
Spray.
Yeah, spray for weeds and stuff, which a lot of people don't like that idea either because it's poison. You know.
Yeah.
But but you got to have so much equipment, and all of it's really expensive. You can't really even think about buying it new. You gotta find something used, but then it's kind of like buying a used car. It's like, well, it's got to be used so you can afford it, but you have to get something that that you're not spending $25,000 for, and it's shot, and it's really not good, and so it's just this hard line. And then if you're doing crops, boy, oh boy. So much depends on the weather, and you can't control the weather,
Even if you're doing a normal crop, so what you see most of the time, and you don't realize the expense that it goes into just planting that crop, and not counting the equipment, they're going to be spending $200 per acre of just operating expense. Then that's what it costs to buy the seed.
Uh-huh.
So the seed will run you around $100 an acre or more. I don't know the prices anymore. Then the fertilizer you put down so it'll grow. And you think, well, don't put the fertilizer, but then you don't really grow
It grows
much.
well.
Mhm.
And then then weed control and all these different expenses go into. So like if you see a big field, like I know if you on your way home you might take the loop and there's some big fields of corn planted.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I know that he has over $200 invested in every acre. Well, if there's 100 acres in that field, that means he has what, $20,000 invested just there. And
And most of the time, you don't have $20,000 laying around, so you borrow from the bank, and then you've got interest,
Yeah.
that you got to pay back.
Well-
And then, if the weather, even if the weather is perfect and everything grows, and you don't have a drought, or you don't have so much rain that you can't even get into the field to start planting on time. Because that matters, if corn isn't planted early, it's going to get too hot too quick, and it's not going to grow, But even if everything's right, then at the end, you got to have you got to have a combine, and no one can afford a combine. They're like what, $100,000 or more.
they start at 500,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have to rely on someone to do that. Well, of course, they're trying to get their crop out. And then they got their friends. They're trying to help them first, of course, And you might be way down the line. In the meantime, your crop is burning up, or maybe it rains some more, and they can't get in to do it,
So- That's the reason most small farms, like we have cattle, we have enough that we can have a small herd of cattle, and then, but it still runs real close to if we make hardly any money off it. Yeah, but because the expenses, okay, when I told you about the tractor breaking down,
Yeah.
well, that was $500 to fix that tractor that I had to put out. Okay, I'll bale hay. Well, we've got our own hay equipment now still, but still, I buy the baling twine to make the bales with. Well, that's what I spend, like $400 just for twine to go on bales and stuff, and just for our hay.
And then like the diesel to run the tractor to do it, and of course the equipment is expensive. We spent $10,000 just on the hay cutter, But you also need a hay baler, and but you can get someone else to do it for you. But how much did it cost
That
per
costs
bale?
$35 per bale.
A bale.
And how much do bales sell for?
About
You-
55.
Do you sell them, or you're just using them for yourself?
I hadn't sold any yet. I just baling enough for myself, and and I don't really want to do custom work for around here for the simple reason it's you wear out your equipment. My equipment's kind of worn out to begin with. I'm just trying to get enough to get my stuff done, so I don't have to hire somebody to make our hay bales,
Yeah.
Or if
It's over half the cost of the bale. if
Sorry,
you
else
somebody else.
you can just buy all your hay. Well, gets real expensive too,
Yeah.
But if you got to have hay because
You
cows
got
are really hungry.
Yeah, right.
And if you have a drought, there is no hay. So then the price of hay goes way up.
Yeah.
And but you gotta have hay,
So we had a drought 2 years ago, and luckily
Yeah.
the year before we had had a bumper crop of hay. It was wet,
Really.
and so we had extra hay.
Bumper crop just means you had a bunch of
but had a whole bunch of it. And so we had all this hay, extra hay then. And so I just felt like a leading from the Lord says, I'm not going to sell the extra hay. Because my son sat there and said, why don't you sell it? That's a little extra income and stuff. And I said, no, I'm going to hold on to it. And so I did. Luckily, I did, because the next year was a severe drought. And I was having to feed hay early because we ran out of grass. And in the drought year, we were doing all sorts of things to make ends meet. Like we have a brush tree that we don't like called the hackberry.
Okay.
And they grow up on the fence row because they have little berries, and birds come and eat the berries, and then they sit on the fence and they poop. And when they poop, that seed goes in the ground right there on the fence row. So your fence rows grow up with all these hackberries that come up, which, it's just a nuisance. It messes up your fence. But
is that what you've been attacking? I heard
that's one of them.
But it was a godsend during the drought because they had all these big hackberries and they have green leaves. And cows actually like those green leaves. So I would go out every day with a saw and I would cut limbs and cut trees, and I would basically cut down about 100 yards, 50 yards a day, let it fall down in the pasture, and the cows would come and strip all the leaves off. Well, of course, I had to go back and pile all that so we could burn it up. But, that was the godsend. We had the leaves from the trees, so with a little bit of green, and I fed that extra hay because I would still have to wind up buying hay. But then what did I pay? $85 a
Yeah, it
bale
was
or
a
something.
lot. Mm-hmm.
It was, or
Not cheap.
it wasn't cheap. And
Because we put out, like 5 bales of hay maybe every 5 days. So you're talking, you do that all winter.
so
You got to buy a lot of hay.
I was averaging using a bale a day. So 1,800 pounds. So they would eat that in a day. So if you had to feed hay for 100 days, which is over 3 months, that's 100 bales of hay, rolls of hay. So the expenses are there, and the small farmers they really have to put like anything, they really need to put a pencil to it and really figure out where the income comes.
If they're going the route where you need a lot of the big, where you're doing large scale, where you need the big.
Well, even if you do
tractor
small
and stuff.
scale, say you had a small farm with sheep and stuff like that, which don't require as much room. You go, so how much hay am I going to need to feed
Right.
these sheep?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you said, well, I don't want to buy the equipment. I'm going to buy my hay.
Yeah.
Well, you got to buy some kind of buggy so you can move that hay.
Yeah.
And behind your pickup or something, and you gotta figure out how that expense comes out of that.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to sell some lambs, but are you going to sell enough where you cover the cost of the hay and everything else? You want to make at least a little bit of money if you can after expenses.
Yeah.
And, I mean,
You hope so.
yeah, and so it's just there's so many things God you get to see in the country, and that's wonderful. But when it comes down to economics, you need to have it economically feasible so that you can make enough that you can live out there. After we got married, and then we had Josh, and he was and when he was a day old, they flew him to Houston to be, he was in Herman Hospital, and in that first year of his life,
He didn't have an esophagus, is what happened.
And they had to stretch it. Is that right?
Yes, eventually that's what they did.
he spent about 6 months of the first year of his life in the hospital, and so that kind of completely wrecked us as people. because, and we had our, we believed in Jesus and all this, but it wasn't really an important thing to us.
Huh.
In the midst of he's in ICU, he's in all these things in the hospital, and this just Christ really wrecked us. I mean, it just tore us down to nothing, and then he built us back. He was like, there's so many things he spoke directly into, and so many miracles we saw happening, and we saw up close and personal as him intimately involved in our lives. And it was just on numerous occasions. And so that made us appreciate so many of the things we see out here, in nature and stuff. And when I say, like I said, with sheep, God talked to me about the sheep, how to separate from the flock. Well, that was just so many things. It's like there's a daily thing. Christ is, the Holy Spirit is talking to us and instructing us and teaching us about so many things. And then, later on we go back and we see that in Scripture and says, wow, I see what you're talking about because you say it right here. But it was, it made our lives so different because God's involved intimately with every aspect of our life, every day, every minute. And it's not just a theory we had heard read in the Bible or a principle. It became where we really realized it's the biggest principle is not to live by principle, but to live on His Word. And when He's speaking to us, because He's talking to us constantly, and it's just changed fundamentally our hearts and our minds and stuff, where if we don't even want to do anything if we don't ask Him about it. So, well, should we do this? And even like if there's something we think we should give toward, for Christmas, last Christmas, and there's a ministry through Billy Graham Ministries, and they do outreaches to different places in the world, do different projects. It's a wonderful ministry, but we didn't know whether we should give toward it or not, and then so we pray about it. So, well, should we give toward it, Lord? God, should we give toward this? And so we just felt moved by the Lord said, yes, you, for every one of your grandkids, you pick a ministry, let them pick. And so like this one was beekeeping in Liberia. And there was another one was
no, there was a lot.
There was one buying a goat for somebody.
I think Katie bought a cow for someone, for a family. There was different. They all picked something they wanted. They wanted to do, and
so we bought. We're older, we're retired, we have a little bit more money to spare, so we paid for the outreach ministry over there, but they got to pick it and they got to participate.
Wow.
And it was like, well, doing that, certainly we just are praying about, so well, should we do it? And it's not what we think, it's God, shall we do this? And I think that's the difference that whole experience taught us, is living in that constant communication and hearing what He says to do, and brings to life that scripture where it talks about He will tell you when to turn left and when to turn right, and things like that, and it's just been really good.
I think what my experience with Josh taught me most of all was at one point he was getting better, and so they did a dye test and ran some dye down and to see if that esophagus was healed, and they didn't know it, but it wasn't. Well, they knew it wasn't exactly healed yet, but they didn't realize a little dye had gotten out, and it collected around his heart. So they didn't know this, but we knew that he wasn't acting right, and so they were watching him closer. And of course, I was up there in Houston. I just stayed there. Back then, they didn't have the Ronald McDonald House. Me and the other ICU parents we stayed in the lobby for 7 weeks. But nobody's gonna leave their baby in ICU.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but Dean had to come back and work and stuff, and he'd come on his days off. But when all this was happening, Dean was back here at work, and I was sitting with Josh, and we knew he wasn't acting right, and he was kind of clammy. And anyway, I was there. It was like 1:00 in the morning. I was sitting by his bed, and I went down to get coffee, and came back up, and they had shut down the ICU. So we knew, all the parents knew, that means someone is in big trouble or someone's dying. And I knew Josh wasn't doing good. So I was scared that was Josh. And sure enough, no one would tell me anything. They're coming in with crash carts and all this. No one's telling me anything. And come to find out, yeah, it was Josh. And then even our doctor wouldn't tell me exactly what happened in there. And usually he was real open. And I finally got it out of one of my nurse friends, and she said, well, Josh's heart stopped for 15 minutes, and she said he turned black. And I was like, what? I was like, what's that gonna mean, but slowly but surely, Josh had a lot of problems. He had seizures, and he's still weak on his left side, but he limps just a little bit. But that's all from just a brain scar that he had from that. But he should have died, or at least had a lot wrong.
Right, 15 minutes.
Yeah,
that's a miracle.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. And he turned black. I'm like, okay, well, maybe he turned purple, but you know what? I think he probably died, and I think God brought him back. But before that, I was sitting beside his bed, and this was a little bit earlier. And he just had a lot of tubes and needles and everything. He had fever, but I couldn't pick him up because he had too much in his body, And I was even cold. They keep ICU cold because of germs.
We know a little bit about the ICU.
Yeah.
It's no fun.
Yes. And I was even cold. Well, they wouldn't cover him up or anything because he had fever, and they were trying to break that fever. And then I was just looking at him, and he was, I think, like 3 months. I don't know, 4 months. Yeah, I think he was about 4 months old. And God spoke to me. Really, for the first time, I actually heard God speak, and He said, I cry every time. He said, I know where you're at. And he said, I watched my son suffer too.
Oh, wow.
And for the first time, I was like, wow, not only did Jesus, what he did for us, but I was experiencing, like, I was a parent. I was watching my son, suffer. And I realized, well, this is what God did. God watched this happen to him, to his son, and he let it happen, for us. And it just turned me around. Because at that time, like Dean said, we were pretty much carnal carnal Christians. We weren't real serious, you know. Um,
You were
And-
a carnal Christian.
and yeah, Dean wasn't a Christian yet, but and I just was like, you know what, I'm just gonna love him, and I'm gonna be what I am. I'm gonna belong to him. I'm gonna act like I belong to him. It changed me so much. So anyway, I mean, Josh went through so much, but for both of us,
And for
I
me,
mean, I changed and turned around, and
that was after that episode that she was just describing. And, I was here at work, and I got off about midnight at work. And Sheri called me at 12:30 and telling me about this. And so I promptly drove down to Houston, and which is about 3.5 hour drive to the hospital, and I made it under 3.
Josh must take after you, huh?
But I got there, and so we go into the ICU after later that day, and he's in bad shape, and I was looking at him, and then he was acting funny, and it turns out he was having a grand mal seizure every 5 minutes or so. And so I asked the nurse, "Is that normal?" And she looked at him, and she got on the phone, and all of a sudden all these people come in and they run me out again. And so I'm walking into the lobby, and pretty distressed, and I said to myself, I wasn't praying or doing anything, I just said to myself, well, is he ever going to be okay? And then I heard this voice that said, he'll be fine. And I'm going, so I turned around to look who said that, and there was no one there. And I turned around, and I realized in that instant there were some people over there, but nobody spoke, and I realized it was the Lord speaking. So hello, and I realized only I could hear it. Nobody else could hear it. So you might say, well, you're just hearing things. But I do know that I heard his voice speak that he'll be fine. And because instantly I lost all anxiety about it.
No way.
I mean, I was not anxious a bit. So much that Sheri was, crying a day or two later and sitting there thinking, why aren't you upset about this? And I just told her, I said, well, I had heard the Lord speak, and he said he's going to be fine. And I have no doubt he's going to be fine because he's spoken directly to me, audibly.
Wow.
And so I gave my life to Jesus at that time. And I says, if you're taking that much trouble, and for me, I'll do whatever you want. And and he didn't speak to her audibly. So I thought, what a gift I had that brings instant faith. And then I read in scripture, it says faith is a gift from God.
Yeah.
And so he gave me that gift. He didn't give it to Sheri. Her faith had to grow as she saw him demonstrate it. And I had the pleasure of being gifted with the faith and see it confirmed. But, it's just...
But I think out of the hardship with Josh and with everything that happened, I think as far as farming and the way it related to that was, we learned that God he takes you through things. He allows things. Look what came out of all that with Josh. I turned around and you really, got back with the Lord, and Dean actually got salvation.
Yeah.
And, so, in the midst of it, you're like, why, and God, do something. But we learned, he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
He knows what he's doing. And even though we don't understand a lot of times, so with farming, with, like a drought or something, all you can do, no one can bring rain but
Yes,
God.
yeah.
And that's the only one that can do it. And you need it. You have to have it. And then you pray and it doesn't happen. But you learn, I think we learned, we trust him anyway. We do not always understand. We've asked God lots of times, like, God, do you know you're the only one that can help us,
Yeah.
The next day we're supposed to get rain, but it doesn't happen, and so, but just a trust in God.
And that's what developed is, it's not just we say a faith, but it's a deep trust that even when it looks like he's not there, he's there. So, we went through this with Josh, and we had just some great things. God healed him in so many ways. And we have our son, with us today.
Mm-hmm.
But then we had some years later where our oldest daughter, Summer, had a little girl, and Emma. And Emma had multitude of problems, and she was in and out of the hospital, and she had a thing called Alagille syndrome, which is a chromosomal disease and a lack of vascular tissue throughout the body. And so ultimately, that's what took her. And so we were at a hard spot praying for and asking for God to heal. And we lost our Emma. She eventually passed away. But I think because he had built in such a deep trust in our hearts that when we didn't understand, we still trusted. And I think came through for us. I think it came through for our daughter, Summer, that amidst of great pain, she still trusted. And it has brought some redemption.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely what's a process, though. We didn't, there was definitely confusion, disappointment, and even, anger for a while. But, it's like Peter, like, where else would I go?
Yeah.
Only, we know God. It's hard when you're disappointed, But I did see, it's really sweet when God will let you see sometimes later, he'll let you see why.
Yeah.
And so that was one thing with Josh. I was able to help Summer with her baby. She lived for 11 and a half months. And she had a G-tube, and there were a lot of things that a lot of people, they're not familiar with it, and it's scary. And
was she in the NICU that whole time?
No, she was at home,
Okay.
But she was in and out of the hospital. But I would go up there 4 days a week, and just kind of take over. Summer and Mike were just devastated and so exhausted, and I'd cook for him and take care of Emma. And but see, I wasn't afraid to do it because I'd taken care of Josh.
Yeah.
And Josh had a G-tube, and Josh had all these medical things I had to do. And so that was kind of just a little glimpse into one reason that he, had prepared me to help Summer take care of her baby,
I think it's so amazing to see Josh
it's like a living picture of God's faithfulness on the other side of this thing. Because I don't know Josh's. I didn't even know that story. He told me we went to Griff's out there in China Spring near where he works.
Yeah.
It's one of the best rated restaurants in Waco, by the way. It's weird.
It's good.
But he told me that. He's like, yeah, this is my strong arm. And I'm like, what do you mean your strong arm? And he told me this crazy story of the esophagus and the kind of like a stroke in the womb. And then the what you just, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And then I noticed, his hand and, the limp. And I always knew him as the man that could do anything. Like Haley and I lived, do you know the Robinsons, Scott and Jenny Robinson?
Uh-huh.
So we lived in that little garage apartment behind their house. I think the Morgans bought it.
Okay.
That's when we first got married. And Josh was helping Scott, and he'd come in, he'd be rummaging around, fixing stuff down below our little... And I just remember this kid is 17 years old. And he's like twice the man I am. He could do anything. But I didn't even know this stuff. But you can see on the flip side, and it makes me think like, gosh, we all have sufferings. Like I know my suffering, like that I'm struggling through the things that I'm praying for God every day. God, help, help, help. But we're appointed to the, it's not like God does it, but he does allow it. And then I don't know how it all works, but I know that it's coming through that crucible, that if we can hang on and trust that we inherit eternal life, we're becoming who we're going to be for eternity. So just hold on.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, that's right.
And I think so much of the time, it's so much is important for our witness.
Right.
And so what is the more powerful witness? You have someone who's come through and still has joy and peace, and they're still haven't been delivered, or somebody who's been delivered and they have joy and peace. And you sit there and look at people, and I know people who've been through horrendous things and they have joy and peace.
Right.
And it's such a powerful witness about the sufficiency of God in their life.
Yeah.
And, it's just, okay, this was enough.
Yeah.
Even in spite of the hardship, it's even sweeter because, you look in Hebrews where it talks about some people chose not to be delivered from these afflictions, Hebrews 11. It was greater joy that they weren't delivered.
To suffer.
And I think then it starts to make a little sense. This is a greater joy that you're not delivered in this time of need, because God has a bigger picture in mind.
Yeah.
And it's just so much richer for your life.
Yeah.
That you have this testimony. And
like in First Peter, it says, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it talks about going through the fire. You're going through the fire, and your faith is like gold. And I think that's kind of how it's worded. And then this next verse says, though you do not see him, you love him.
Right.
And that is the greatest testimony. People, even like the devil talking about Job, it's like, yeah, he's got everything. Why wouldn't he love you? But it's when you don't, and when things happen and you still love him, you still trust him. And like I said, no one's a super Christian. There's always a process. It's always hard. It's always questions and working through, but you still love them.
Yeah.
Because we know them.
Yeah, I remember some of the things. Matt, back in y'all went through ATS school too.
2000.
So when we went through it and stuff, and I remember one of Jimmy's teachings in that school that was so powerful. It's like God's just trying to teach you something, and then so you need to count it all joy when you encounter various trials. And I'm going, count it joy? Are you kidding me? But it is so true. It's like when you go through this, and you go through this trial, and it comes out, and you see that God's still faithful in that trial, and he's showing you new things and teaching you greater things, then it's like, oh, that's so much more precious than having this difficulty that you're going through.
That's right. Wow. Well, that's rich.
You guys have been through a lot too, and even being, overseas and everything. I feel like that's something, in a way, it's kind of like farming, as far as it's in your blood, it's in your DNA. It's what you're made for. That's kind of how it is with farming. It's just kind of in their blood. They don't make any money, but we love it. Who would know? But being missionaries and stuff, that's in your blood, and it's hard. It was probably hard for y'all to come home, and I know you guys, everyone has had different things that happen that's just really, really hard in their life,
Yeah. But count it all joy. We
Yeah.
get to keep it forever.
Yeah.
I remember a prayer I used to pray, and this is way back when Josh was up there, and it says, God's given you wisdom, counting that person, God's given you wisdom and stuff, and I remember it says, Lord, I don't know how much more wisdom I can take. It's getting kind of tough. Sometimes you said, please just ease up just a little.
Well, that's a great place to stop, I think. This was rich. Thank y'all so much.
We really got way off of farming, but
No, it's wonderful. It's exactly the way I love that these conversations can go any which way. And I had something happen here and something happen here. We got it all, but it'll just be unique, just like the conversation was.
Good.
So
Good.
Man, thank y'all.
Yeah.
I pray it could be a blessing for y'all.
It's a blessing for me, just this right here.
Yeah. So that somebody would see it as a blessing. And stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's this tsunami of homesteading that's happening right now. I don't know if you know, but it's exploding right now. So many people are feeling instinctively, I want to do some of these things. But the carriers of this information, you're like a gem between your grandparents and your children's age. Your kids got it, but most kids didn't. Most all of our grandparents had some connection with the land, and most all of my generation has no connection with the land. But it seems like God's doing something right now. And I think it does have to do with come out of Babylon. Not that we're all going to become farmers or anything, but that we are going to, these systems that we've made for convenience I don't think there's some of these things I don't think the Lord wants us to do.
Yeah.
Including AI, maybe including big ag, the way we do big ag, agriculture. I think there might be some.
I remarked, my father passed when I just turned 20.
Is that right?
And then I came and helped my mother do stuff. And I noticed immediately that there was so many things. I was, well, how do you do this and stuff? And I said, well, and the thought was, let me ask Daddy. And he's not here.
Yeah.
And so I had to relearn how to do some things and ask my uncles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, well, how do you do this and stuff?
And some things just get lost with the generation.
And what happened when Sheri came, she was devoid of knowledge out here. And she comes up there, and I remember, like, there's certain things you do. It's like a diversion terrace. And so we have them out in the fields, and it's an erosion control thing.
Oh, okay.
And so I tried to explain this to Sheri, how it works. And for years, she couldn't get it. And then finally, one day, I just said, it was raining real hard. I said, hurry, get in the pickup. She says, why? So I just quickly drove out to the edge of the field, and this is that's the reason we have diversion terraces.
So what it is, do you know what a terrace is? It's
I know
just
a
kind
terrace.
of a hill, but it's along.
It goes along the hillside.
A long
Okay.
hill,
Uh-huh.
and so it feeds the water off of the land. So I couldn't
It
understand.
slows it down to keep you from having gullies or washing
Okay.
away so much soil.
Okay.
And it just diverts it to the end where you have a grass waterway, so you're not really losing that soil.
Huh.
Yeah,
And but I tried.
I'm visual.
I tried. I don't know how many times I explained it to her, and it was I could only do it. Say, "Come, you got to see." Then
I know,
you'll-
Yeah,
you're
yeah, come and
terrible.
see.
So you probably just said, it's just a terrace. A terrace that takes the water off the land. I'm like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So,
There's a lot like that we're.
yeah, even the tank. I was like, what in the world?
When I came
it's
to
called a
Waco-
pond.
Yeah, that's what I said too. My buddy that probably was born out. He was born out in Hubbard. He's like, just take it right after the second tank. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
what kind of tanks are we gonna
Yeah.
find out here?
Yeah, and I grew up in the military, so a tank
Right.
is
So you-
it's artillery.
Wow.
So